You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and today I welcome back my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Todd Fiore. Todd is the program chair for the PhD in Organizational Development and Leadership program at the University of Arizona Global Campus. And if you've listened to his previous episodes, and I'll make sure to have these in the show notes below, you know that he combines his practical experience with academic wisdom to successfully foster doctoral student success. Todd, welcome to the show.
Glad to be back.
I am so excited to record today's episode because what we are going to talk about today is not only going to save a lot of students a lot of time and a lot of heartache, but we're going to share a perspective that may help bring more joy into the doctoral journey. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think let's start with the idea of taking a positive approach to topic selection. That's one of these you control, is you can decide what you want to study within reason, of course. So it really comes down to finding a topic, but then what do you want to learn more about that? And I think sometimes that's the hard part, is figuring out a perspective of what can we learn more about this topic to inform both practice and scholarship. And my theory today, and I want to put forward, is look for a positive perspective that you can study within your topic. I think that's the way to go.
So you and I both have been involved with student research projects that are really focused on the quote unquote negative. You even have some examples.
Yes, I
want to share?
I'd be happy to share. I looked through ProQuest dissertations and theses at some more recent dissertations. And let me preface this by saying there's nothing wrong with these studies, but I'm just going to read the titles to you. And you tell me if your reaction, if you think these are more positive or negative kind of studies. And let me read a couple of them. First one, Fanatics, exposing the noxious underbelly of modern fandom culture. Another one, Sun Wounds Don't Heal, Spirit Assassination Attempts. Another one, Youth in Dark Times, Broken Promises and Dashed Hopes. And I'll give you a final one. The Detrimental Side Effects of Toxic Leadership in Public Education. Now, these are all legitimate studies. These are all probably good examples of scholarship. But boy, doesn't it sound like it's pretty negative? Doesn't it paint a very dark picture?
And you're going to be immersed in this research for quite a while. And we know, and listener, you've probably experienced, that this journey is an arduous one. So I think what I see happen is that students often focus on a problem and kind of get entrenched in this terrible thing that's happening that they want to help fix. And the project is then framed that way. And you're suggesting, hey, what happens if we pivot and frame it positively? Not only could it put you in a state where you're learning about things that are maybe lighter and more actionable in a positive way versus being steeped in this negativity, but it can also save you a lot of time. And we're going to talk about that. But let's talk about this pivot, this reframe, how you could take a problem that you're interested in and pivot it.
Sure. Let's just give a practical example. So let's choose the general topic of maybe age discrimination in the workplace. I think everybody would recognize that if that's happening, that's a problem. And you can approach this from a research standpoint by saying, I want to find out why organizations are forcing out their older workers. And I want to see what is causing them to push these people aside. That would be one way to frame it. But another way to reframe it would be, instead of what's pushing them out, why don't we study best practices for retaining older workers? Look at what positive things organizations might be doing to take advantage of this particular subpopulation of workers. you're going to get probably the same answers looking at both when you do a thorough investigation. But if you come from the perspective of best practices or a positive framing of how do we retain versus how are they being pushed out, I think what you'll find is that the findings of the study will tend to be more practical and solutions oriented. A lot of people can identify the negative, can identify the problems. Gosh, we have a problem with age discrimination. Look at what's happening to these poor workers. And look at what's happening to the organizations. They're losing the benefits of the years of experience and wisdom these people have. Okay, that's true. But then what do we do with that information? So what? If you frame it from the positive as what is best practices for retaining these employees, you could think of it as, now the findings are, okay, here's things that we can act on. Maybe a best practice is to have some retraining programs. Great. Let's figure out how we can do that in our own organization. Or maybe another best practice is create consulting opportunities for these people that are nearing retirement. Great. Let's look at ways we can do that. Perhaps a best practice is offering part-time employment. Maybe there are people that would like to continue but don't want to do so on a full-time basis. So the findings may result in more actionable type of things that you could do.
And not only that, let's now talk about data collection. And I do want to give some examples here in a bit from my field of psychology and what I see. But when you think about the example you just gave, and let's say you want to do either a qualitative or a quantitative study, you're going to be approaching, maybe it's HR, maybe it's leadership, maybe it's individual employees. But let's talk about the type of data you'll be collecting. It's very different to go into a place and say, I want to talk to you about this thing that's happening, ageism, versus I want to talk to you about how you're capitalizing on the strengths of this part of the workforce that has been around for a while. It's a totally different proposition.
Absolutely. Imagine if you're an HR director and a student researcher comes to you and says, I want to learn all about the ageism in your company versus I want to learn about what you're doing well. Let me give you another example from the field of education, because a lot of student research has been done in the area of student retention. Imagine you're recruiting participants for your study and you approach them with, I want to find out the reasons you dropped out of college versus, hey, I want to learn more about things that would encourage you to stay in college. Would you be more willing to be open and honest and give me your time if you want to talk about a positive thing about staying in college versus dropping out of college in a negative connotation? So using a more positive approach will give you more of an in. And we both know that recruiting participants, finding cooperation for your study, it's hard right now. People have a lot of things on their plate. There's a lot of participant fatigue. So I think anything that can give you an advantage in terms of finding people for your study to collect data, it only works out for the better for you.
You know, those were great examples in the fields of business and education. What I see a lot in psychology are things related to maybe PTSD or relapse or burnout. And again, if you think about the participants that you want in your study and that you need to recruit them and you want them to talk to you, is it maybe a better way to go to ask someone, can you tell me how you overcame this challenge? I'm looking for people who had this experience and overcame it. I'm looking for social workers who aren't burnt out. Tell me, what is it that you do to remain engaged in your job and to maintain your well-being? Again, the end result is you're going to have some very practical information and probably an easier go at collecting the data. So we're not saying don't research your area and don't give up on the problem that you're interested in, but we're challenging you here to think creatively. Can I approach this in a more positive way? And I do want to bring up the IRB because especially in the field of psychology, when you're asking someone questions that can really open them up to being re-traumatized, the IRB may have some serious concerns about the questions that you're asking these people and how you're protecting their rights and their welfare. So again, you can have this topic, trauma, but you can approach it in a way that gives you great information, contributes to the field, gets you participants, and perhaps, reduces barriers that you would have at the IRB stage. So our question to you today, listeners, kind of like, why wouldn't you?
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought up the IRB, because as ethical researchers, we want to do no harm. And we don't want to put anybody that is associated with our study in any position where they might feel re-traumatized or in a position where just recounting the events would make them feel bad. Beyond that, though, the ideas of why things happen has been well researched. There are a lot of studies out there, for instance, about recidivism. For instance, why people who have been previously convicted of crimes commit them again. So I think what most people are trying to do when you think about that area is, well, how can we fix this problem? And while no dissertation has ever fixed a problem, and hopefully our listeners understand that your dissertation is going to be meaningful, but it's not going to change the world. But the findings can be used in a positive way. And if you come from a positive point of view or a more positive paradigm, the findings may be more action.
I think it's important to remember that you're not here to fix a problem. Your dissertation is one piece of a puzzle, of a very large puzzle. And today we're challenging you to think about that puzzle piece and what form is it going to take, and why not be a bright, shiny puzzle piece?
Absolutely. One of the things that is great about research is it's really all about examining multiple perspectives of the same kind of problem. And one of the great things you get to do as a researcher is you get to pick that perspective. And there has been some criticism from other researchers that are like, if you only take the positive approach, you're limiting the number of perspectives that are available. And that's true to a point. I don't want to say that that's not the case. But I do think that it will also reduce the potential for research bias. Because we know that, one of the things that attracts us to a topic is often our own experience. And if we're pulling our own negative experiences, which is a perfectly fine way to look at a topic, but if we pull that into our research, then the potential for bias is there as well. If we've been passed over for a job, for instance, several times, and then we want to study why that happens to people like us, we may have a tendency to inject that experience into our data collection and data analysis. But if you come from a positive point of view, your negative experience, then it's easier to bracket that. It's easier to set that aside because you're looking for the other side of that. What are the ways to improve your chances for success at promotion? Is it education? Is it mentoring? Is it whatever? And that's just one example. But I do think that coming from a more positive approach helps, especially novice researchers, to take themselves out of the equation.
And again, such an important point, I think, especially in early drafts. As a dissertation chair or committee member, you can read the bias in there. You know that this probably happened to this person or someone they know and love because it's just so entrenched. And this is one way to protect against that, is to, again, we're not saying don't write about something that's inherently interesting to you. We're just saying, hey, here's a way you can go about it that will maybe balance your perspective.
Absolutely. And, part of working on a dissertation or research study is identifying a problem, working on it, but it also is the time that you are putting into it. Your dissertation is going to take you a year or two of your life. Do you want to spend that time focusing on the negative or focusing on the positive? There are principles of positive psychology about putting yourself in places where your state of mind is more positive, where your experiences are more positive. And you're more likely to have those if your research approach is more positive as well. So, while a dissertation is challenging, it doesn't have to be a negative experience, particularly if you are not coming at it from a negative point of view.
Yeah, the field of positive psychology, thank goodness we have started looking at things from more of a benefit versus deficit model. over the past couple of decades, but it's something to consider as a doctoral student. Whether you're conducting interviews or collecting the surveys, you guys know I'm a big believer in energy and vibration and what you're creating in your world. And again, we're not dissuading you from tackling that problem that's really interesting to you, that you're passionate about. We're just asking you to consider, can you reframe this in a positive way? Because there are many advantages, including your personal psychological state of mind and emotional well-being while you're entrenched in the data, but also the ease that may come through participant selection and IRB challenges, reducing that researcher bias. Todd, do any other obvious benefits come to mind? Did we leave any out?
We left any out. Associated kind of with researcher bias would be the idea, for a lot of novice researchers, you come into it thinking, I want to show my point of view, or I want to tell the stories of these people that have been traumatized. And there's nothing wrong with that. We want you to do that. But if it becomes more of an expose mentality, like, I'm going to show them, that's where you get into trouble. And again, if you come from a positive paradigm, it becomes, I'm going to show how we can fix this potentially, versus I'm going to show what's wrong.
And so maybe if you're listening right now and you've got your topic area and you're feeling resistance to this idea, like, no, I don't want to reframe it. I don't want to be positive. That might be a check. That might be a signal that perhaps maybe you do need to do a little reflection on your end goals. We say this a lot, whether it's your dissertation, your applied doctoral project, it's an academic product that provides evidence to the university you are worthy of this degree. It is not a soapbox. It is not something to use to promote an agenda. It is a scholarly work. And so if you're feeling any resistance about maybe pivoting, then maybe we're going to suggest you do a little reflection on that.
I just had that same conversation with a student about a week ago about, hey, this isn't an advocacy project. And at the end of our conversation, the student said, I get it now. This isn't show and tell. This isn't telling my story. This is understanding the concepts that are surrounding my story. And that's really all it is. It's an academic exercise. You can't help sometimes be attached to it. I'm still attached to my dissertation, but you have to be able to detach from it in terms of what the findings are and how they can be used. So this approaching from a more positive paradigm, helps you to do that. And it's probably one of the most effective ways I've seen for students to overcome that idea.
I hope this episode has given you guys something to think about. And as we're wrapping up, Todd, do you have a favorite quote or some final words of wisdom you want to share with the audience?
So one quote that I like comes from Willie Nelson, who said, once you replace negative thoughts with positive ones, you'll start having positive results. And what that means is if you can look at things from a more positive perspective, you tend to have a more positive experience. And that's really all we're saying here is, as you approach your research project, you can choose to come from a more positive frame of reference. And we've seen success with people that do that.
We are definitely recommending you consider making that choice. Reframe your study from a positive perspective and glean lots of positive outcomes. So Todd, thanks so much for coming on to today's show.
Happy to be here as always.
Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Until then, if you're looking for more ways to invite joy in your journey, check out the free resources at expandyourhappy.com. You'll find downloads like an article I wrote titled The Doctoral Journey, 12 Things You Need to Know That They Probably Won't Tell You. You'll also find a PDF that organizes all podcasts by the 7 steps detailed in the Happy Doc Student Handbook, which you can also find on the website. Finally, if you're looking for a Happy Doc student swag, I've got that too. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel, and if you want to make my day, rate and review so that together we can change the way doctoral education is delivered and experienced. Hey, one more thing. Just a quick reminder that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only.